The morning she asked for bread, the sky hung low and gray, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Hunger had a sound that day, a hollow rustle that followed her steps, a quiet ache that lived behind her eyes. She walked with the careful dignity of someone who had already lost too much to risk losing the last thing she owned, her pride. When she reached the edge of the street where the bakery's warmth fogged the windows, her hands trembled, not from the cold alone, but from the fear of being seen as less than human. Before the story pulls you deeper, pause for a moment. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet power of humanity, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support keeps stories like this alive. Her name was Miriam, and hunger had become her shadow. It followed her through the narrow lanes where dust settled into cracks and the smell of yesterday clung to the walls. Once, her home had been a place of laughter and steady meals, of plans made over tea and evenings that felt endless. Then illness came, then debt, then the long nights where she counted the hours by her children's breathing. She had learned to stretch a single meal across a day, to soften stale rice with water, to tell stories that made empty bellies forget themselves for a while. But that morning, there was nothing left to stretch. Her youngest had fallen asleep clutching air, and Miriam knew she had reached the edge. The bakery stood like a small miracle, its door opening and closing with the promise of warmth. Bread was stacked behind the glass, golden and alive, the smell reaching into the street like a hand. Miriam waited for the right moment, measuring courage the way she once measured flour. When she finally stepped inside, the heat wrapped around her, and for a second she closed her eyes, letting it pretend she was safe. She did not ask for much. She asked for bread, her voice steady, her head lifted, her hands open. It was the simplest request, and the heaviest she had ever made. The man behind the counter looked at her clothes, at the worn edges, and the careful cleanliness that spoke of effort. His eyes flicked to the line forming behind her. The world has a way of deciding quickly who deserves patience. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable, and Miriam felt the familiar burn behind her eyes. She thought of turning away, of walking back out into the gray, of finding some other way. Hunger teaches you to accept humiliation as currency, but it never stops hurting. What happened next did not come as a single blow, but as a series of small moments that cut deeper than a shout. The man shook his head, not cruelly, but firmly, the way rules are enforced without thought. Bread cost money, and rules do not bend for empty hands. The line shifted. Someone sighed. Miriam felt the floor tilt under her feet. She nodded, thanked him, and turned, because dignity sometimes is simply leaving without making a scene. Outside, the wind pressed against her like a question she could not answer. She walked a few steps, then stopped, because hope is stubborn. Hunger makes you brave in strange ways. She turned back, her heart pounding, and asked again, offering to pay later to clean, to do anything that would turn flour into life. This time, the refusal came faster, sharper, and it landed like a door closing inside her chest. She stepped back, the street swallowing her, and that was when the hearts around her began to break, not all at once, but one by one. A woman waiting nearby had watched the exchange. She had come for pastries, for a morning that would taste sweet, and now she tasted something else entirely. She saw the way Miriam stood straight, backed, as if refusing to let hunger bend her spine. The woman reached into her bag, then hesitated, unsure if help would offend. The world teaches us to mind our business, to look away. But kindness, when it arrives, does not ask permission. As Miriam turned to leave, a small hand tugged at the woman's sleeve. A child, eyes wide and curious, asked a question too honest for adults to ignore. The woman felt something crack open inside her, something old and urgent. She stepped forward, paid for the bread, and added more than Miriam had asked for. She did not make a speech. She did not demand gratitude. She simply placed the bag into Miriam's hands, and in that moment, the weight of it felt like the weight of being seen. Miriam's breath caught. She held the bread as if it might vanish, as if it were a dream she dared not wake from. Tears came then, not loud or messy, but quiet, slipping down her face with relief and shame and gratitude all tangled together. She bowed her head, not in submission, but in acknowledgement of a kindness that had no conditions. The woman nodded back, eyes shining, and turned away, because some moments are sacred and do not need witnesses. Word traveled faster than Miriam's steps. The man inside the bakery saw the exchange through the window. He felt the familiar discomfort of being confronted with a choice he had already made. Rules protect businesses, he told himself, but they also protect hearts from having to feel too much. Yet something had shifted. He stepped outside, called after Miriam, and added more bread to her bag. It was not an apology, not quite, but it was an offering, a crack in the wall he had built to keep the world simple. Miriam walked home with the bag pressed to her chest, the smell of bread warming her from the inside out. Each step felt lighter, as if the street itself had softened. When she reached her door, her children looked up, eyes widening, hope blooming before she could stop it. She broke the bread carefully, making sure each piece was fair, teaching them without words that sharing multiplies. They ate slowly, savoring not just the taste, but the return of safety, however brief. That afternoon, Miriam sat by the window watching the light change. Hunger would return, she knew. Life had taught her not to believe in permanent miracles. But something else had changed too. She had been seen, not as a problem to be managed, but as a person worth helping. That knowledge settled into her bones, steadying her for the days ahead. She decided then to pass the kindness forward in whatever small ways she could, watching a neighbor's child, sharing a story, offering a smile that said you are not alone. The woman who had helped her carried the moment home as well. She told her family about the morning, about the way a simple act had shifted the air around them. They listened, quieter than usual, and something gentle took root. The child asked questions about hunger and fairness, and the answers were not easy, but they were honest. In another part of the city, the baker closed his shop that night and counted the day differently, measuring it not just in coins, but in the weight of a choice he might make differently tomorrow. Stories like this do not end with everything fixed. They end with a thread tied between strangers, a reminder that hearts can break open and still beat stronger for it. Miriam's days remained uncertain, but they were no longer invisible. She learned that asking for bread was not a failure. It was an act of love for her children. And the world, for a moment, had answered. If this story has been touching your heart as it unfolds, please take a second to engage with it. Your likes, shares, and subscriptions help these stories reach the people who need them most. Just before we end, please comment below with one word that describes how this story made you feel, or share a moment when kindness changed your life. As the evening settled and the city hummed with its ordinary noises, Miriam lay beside her children, listening to their full breaths. The ache of hunger had eased, replaced by a quiet warmth that came from more than bread. Somewhere beyond her window, strangers moved through their lives, carrying pieces of the same day. And though the world would test her again, she drifted to sleep knowing that even in its hardest moments, compassion could still find its way through a cracked door and change everything.